Good morning, Ally. How are you?
Oh, Jen, the world, the world, the world, the world. That's all I'm going to say because we're not going to get into it, but that's how I'm going to begin. That's my response for this morning.
I think that's an appropriate response. And I was just saying to you before I hit record that we have our emotional support pets with us.
Me too.
I have yours blends in a little bit better than mine sitting right in front of the camera.
Give her time. I'm sure that the more that we talk, the more she's going to be like, oh, the webcam is on. Let me just saunter over there, jump up onto the desk, and put my tail in everybody's face because that's usually how she operates.
Yeah, this one doesn't have a tail, so I do benefit from that. But otherwise, she's the co-pilot for the day.
Pilot. All right. Well, let's just let them tell everybody about numbers and publishing.
I think we should. Honestly, they probably know a lot at this point.
So sick of hearing us say the same thing over and over and over again.
I
But
know.
hopefully, those who are joining us live or catching the replay, you don't know what we're about to share, or this is a good refresher, or you learn at least one or two new pieces that you didn't know before. So today we're diving into what numbers you should know in publishing. And believe it or not, while you would think writing and publishing is a words game, there are quite a few numbers that are worth you knowing about as you're embarking on this journey or doing it again and wanting to do it differently, whatever the case may be. We do want to invite anyone who is catching this live to drop a hello into the comments, and also feel free to interact and engage. If we say something that is a major aha moment for you, we would love to know about it. Or if you have a follow-up or clarifying question to something that we've shared, we want to know that too, so that we can make sure we're getting you the best information possible before we wrap up today, because we don't come back for another month. So this is what you get. You get a heavy dose this morning, and then it's another month before you get to hear us flap our jaws about this stuff again. Jen, I don't even know where to start with this topic. I know we have like lots of numbers to cover, but where would you even begin in breaking this down?
Well, I feel like the thing that most authors, oh, Christy's here.
Christy, you
Yay.
rock, sister.
Sure does. Yes. Also good. I was going to say, I think starting with how many words is like an ideal number for a manuscript, whether it's memoir or nonfiction, because I think that's the thing that if more authors really understood, I think they would save a lot of time and anguish and less showing up
Anguish.
script. It's like 140,000 words, and we're like, yeah, we need about half that. So I think kind of starting with there might be a good jumping off point.
Awesome. Okay, so let's start here. Why would understanding the word count of a manuscript be helpful? Okay, lots of reasons, folks. Lots of reasons for this. The first, Jen already alluded to, like when you have a better sense of how long your manuscript should be, or ballpark figure of how long your manuscript should be, then you're not like just writing until your fingers bleed. You are working towards a goal. Now, the other reason that it would be important is that, as Jen also pointed out, when you get to a publisher, publishers are going to be expecting a certain range of words depending on the genre that you're working in. Okay, and we'll talk about what those word counts might be. A third reason to know this, though, is that publishers, as well as other people in the book space that you might come across, such as editors and interior designers, are also going to base their price points off of your word count, and we'll dive into that as well. So we've got this kind of time aspect and kind of like what you're shooting for and how long is it going to take you to produce a manuscript at X number of words. But there's also a very heavy cost and budgeting component to the numbers and understanding what those are. Now, here's one caveat to all of this. You might have to write 140,000 words in order to end up with a 70,000 word manuscript. I'm sorry, but that's just the truth. Because a lot of the time we don't know what we're trying to say until we say it. We have to write it all out only to then realize that 20% of it is actually just irrelevant fluff that felt good to say because we needed to clear it out of our systems, but doesn't actually make it into the final version. So when we're talking about word count in this instance, we're not necessarily talking about what you might end up writing throughout the course of developing the manuscript, but where you want to end up by the time you're handing it over to a publisher.
Yeah.
Any other kind of like why this is important that I missed, Jen?
No, I think I think this is fantastic. I think the one thing I would elaborate a little bit further on
Yeah.
is in the planning phases. So when we're thinking about,
Yeah.
I'm a first-time author, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm sitting down at a screen. I want to write my memoir. I want to write a how-to book. Knowing how many words, generally speaking, are appropriate and or what your goal is, what that will help you do is actually put a really concrete plan in place. So instead of sitting in front of that blinking cursor, it kind of eliminates some of the stress, because you could say, okay, I don't have to produce an endless amount of words. I'm aiming for 40,000 words. And then you can kind of really put together a plan in place to say, okay, how am I actually going to create those 40,000 words and over what period of time? So I think it creates some kind of guardrails and parameters for first-time authors to kind of reduce some of that overwhelm.
And I think that the important word that you said there was guardrails. So when we offer some suggestions, some estimations on where you should kind of land with your manuscript, it's not like, it's not Bible, it's not gospel, it's not whatever word you want to use. Like, there is some play here in that you want to use whatever words that you need to use in order to make your point clear and well-rounded, or to make your story fully developed and not having gaps and holes in it that leave the reader with a lot more questions. So you still need to write to the point where your manuscript is as fully developed as it can be. And that sometimes might not mean hitting the exact like mile marker that we're talking about. So there are some nuances here, for sure. But definitely, I think having something to work towards helps to keep things a little bit more on the rails than kind of shooting blind. So Jen, as a publisher, where would you want to see manuscripts from, like a prescriptive nonfiction, thought leadership, kind of how-to book?
There are so many variables in my answer, but I would say I love a short book. I love a good 150-page book that's like 35,000 words for something that is transformational for the reader. Because if we think about the mindset of a reader, if you're writing a memoir, someone is there for the story. For a memoir, and you can speak to all of this, is like we can be longer there because they want the details of the story. For nonfiction, we really need to give them what they're looking for and help them see the transformation they can get and the problem that can be solved and move on. So I love a good short book. However, with that being said, 150-page book just doesn't work for a lot of people because they have a lot more to say than 35,000 words. So my recommendation is typically no more than 60,000. Are there outliers to this? 100%. Do we have books that are 110,000 words? Yes. Yes, we do. Do we have books that are 20,000 words? Yes. So again, it's more about kind of giving you a little bit of a guardrail, but I think somewhere, not pushing past that 300-page mark. Like, I really think that that's where readers start to get overwhelmed when they're reading something that is a prescriptive nonfiction.
Yeah. Now, Jen and I both wrote books that are huge. So we
Exactly.
break the rule. However, Jen, is your book classified as reference? Because that's what mine is. Mine is classified as writing reference.
Yeah, I won an award in the reference category for it.
Reference category. Okay. So reference books, while nonfiction, right, tend to be a little bit meatier and a little bit longer, because the whole point is that you're kind of giving people a one-stop shop for them to refer to a source and get all the information that they need. Okay. So when we are talking prescriptive nonfiction, we're talking about a nonfiction book that's less in the narrative, like less story arc, less character driven, that type of thing, and more about teaching someone how to do something better or creating a transformation or change in the reader because of what they have read within the book. Now, so Jen is saying somewhere no more than 60,000 is kind of where you're at. So other publishers that I've worked with in the last year, 45 seems to be the magic number for them. 45,000 words. 50 being like the higher buffer. When we're getting to like 60,000, what I'm seeing is that these are like more specialized nonfiction projects. But if it's a prescriptive or it's thought leadership or that kind of, like, people are telling me try to keep it to like 45 to 50.
Sounds like a 250-page book. That's like such a beautiful length.
Yeah. Now, Jen, how did you get to that number? How can people generally understand how word count translates to finished published pages?
Such a nuance. So in my mind, it's all just like a table that just lives in my head. However, generally speaking, it's about 250 to 300 words fit per page. So you can kind of do that kind of basic math. There are 100 variables in that statement because it depends on how the pages are formatted. It depends on the settings of the margins. It depends on the font size, et cetera, et cetera. However, I usually go by 250 to 300 pages. So, and it depends if it's a 5.5 by 8.5, which is a standard nonfiction size, or a 6 by 9, which is standard memoir size.
Okay. And we call those trim sizes, folks.
Sure.
So if you're kind of like trying to visualize what your book is going to look like on the other end, you don't want to be visualizing the full page number of your Word document or your Google document. Okay. Those are 8.5 by 11, like flat sheets. Okay. We're talking about a double-sided, right? Much smaller layout and design. But if you want to get a sense, like if in your mind, you're like, oh, I really want a smaller, short book. Okay. And you're trying to figure out what that means, then I want you to go to the bookstore, your bookshelf, and I want you to look at books, right? And determine like, oh, this is kind of what I envisioned, right? Pick the book up, flip to the back, see how many pages it is, and then you can do this math equation in reverse to basically guess how many words your manuscript would need to be in order to produce a final book in that size. Okay.
Yeah. The one thing I would add is that final page count, that printed page count that you're seeing in the book is not actually the page count, because there's a PDF page count and then there's a printed page count. And the PDF page count is usually at least 20 pages more, if not 30 pages, because it accommodates all of the stuff that comes in the front of the book and sometimes the stuff that comes at the end of the book, which is called front and back matter. So just throwing that in the mix as well.
And a lot of the times your front matter is Roman numeral, right?
Yes.
Right. So when you're looking at the page number in the back of the book, right, it's not actually including all of the Roman numeral pages in the front of the book, right? Now, and why is there so many pages? Right. Well, because printers are going to print 4-page spreads, right, in order to then divide evenly and have that spine. So look, all the things that like first-time authors don't really think about and don't know that we get to geek out on right here for all of you. Now, I want to go to costs, however, because we're talking about trim size, we're talking about variables, we're talking about like, you know, how long a manuscript is. In my experience, when I've seen quotes come in for clients, interior designers are often pricing per page, right? Page, however, right, is also going to be based on word count, right? And what they're getting for a file to deal with when it comes to laying the whole thing out. So obviously, the longer your book and the more pages of your book, the higher the cost for interior design, because they're going to base their quote off of how long your manuscript is. Now, editors, whether that's developmental, line, mechanical, or copy, yes, they are all different, but that's not what today's about. They're also going to likely price your editing on what your word count is. So again, if you have a longer manuscript, the price of paying that editor is going to be higher. Now, there are some nuances here too. Some editors price low and some editors price high. There is a range based sometimes on experience, credentials, expertise, any number of things. So you could go to 3 different editors and have one come in super low and one come in super high because they're using a different per word price point than others in the industry. Doesn't necessarily always mean that the person pricing low is bad at what they do. They might not realize that they're really great at what they do and should be pricing higher. Also could be a sign of inexperience though. So it's hard to gauge by numbers alone what you're getting for quality output with the editing, which is why I really encourage everyone to get a sample and to meet with the editors and to talk through what their process is and what to expect from them and really vet them heavily, because editing, I think, apart from independent or hybrid publishing, if that's the route you're going, I think editing is really your second highest cost, unless you're working with a coach or a ghost. But if you're skipping those steps and you're getting through the manuscript yourself and then paying an editor is going to be one of your higher price points. So you want to make sure that if you're making an investment in that editor, you know what you're getting back.
Yeah, the thing that I want to add to that, because I completely agree in terms of just being mindful of, it's kind of like being mindful of how we're using an editor, right? Because if So I'll give you an example that just happened a couple of weeks ago. I had somebody who has a 138,000 word manuscript. And I said to them, A, this is too long to publish. We could publish a 700-page book, but nobody's going to buy it. And I don't think it's a good use of your resources to put them in this. I think you should go back and trim back that manuscript as much as humanly possible. If you can get it down to 60,000 words or less, that'd be wonderful. However, going from 138 to 60,000, that's a big task for somebody.
Yeah.
And so when you look at an editing standpoint, like a developmental editor's job is to come in and trim the fat, to point out areas that can be improved or be added to and things like that. But if we, as the author, can do as much of that work as we can, we're going to save in cost across the board of the project. Because if I hire a developmental editor at 138,000 words, that is going to be an astronomical editing bill. Like, it's going to be huge.
Yeah.
Or I can spend the time doing it myself and just trimming everything I can think of and bringing it down to at least half that. You're going to save half the cost from an editing standpoint. So I like to remind people of that, because I think what sometimes happens is that, and I know we've talked about author fatigue before as well, what sometimes happens is that we get to that place of fatigue where it's like, I did everything I could to get all these words on paper, and now I just want to hire the experts to help me fix it. But sometimes taking that extra time to go through and fixing as much of it that we can on our own will save us in both that editing cost and the typesetting cost, as you were saying.
Yeah. And this is also going back to Jen, the whole idea of guardrails. Yeah. If you've drafted 138,000 words, but you know that your genre is like half than that, you're going to be wasting half of the editing costs for that person to tell you what to cut when you already knew that you needed to reduce the manuscript by however much money. And I just did some quick math over here. So like if you handed a developmental editor 138,000 word manuscript and they were charging you 10 cents a word, you'd be paying $13,800 for that developmental edit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, not chump change, right? This is truly an investment, but you can use this investment wisely, or spend this investment wisely, right? By knowing what you need, and also knowing that you've done everything imaginable on your own before you tap someone else. So you said something else that I wanted to touch on, and Editorial Freelancers Association, the EFA. Has a great pricing list for editorial rates on their website. This is a tremendous resource for first-time authors who don't know what they're getting into, because you'll see the ranges of editorial rates. So you'll know what's low and you'll know what's high, right? And that'll at least give you a ballpark figure to help with budgeting for this project. Okay, now that's just editorial. That's not pointing out necessarily all the other things. So we've talked about editorial, we've talked about word count, we've talked about trim size, and we've talked about how interior design works. Jen, what else should we talk about from a design perspective? Cover design. Cover design is going to come with other numbers to consider, such as what is a typical budget for cover design? How many back cover endorsements should you consider? How long should those endorsements be, right?
Everything is numbers.
Everything is numbers. This is a really horrible algebra equation. I don't like to mix my numbers and my words, but like, this is just what it comes down to when you get into the business of publishing and you step outside of writing and development, right?
Yeah, this, like, we think about books as the art, but it really is the science behind, is the production aspect of all of this.
Yeah, so many things to consider. So I would say cover design on average, expect a really great cover design for no less than 500. Would you say that that's true?
At the minimum, yeah. Yeah, you can easily be paying 5,000, right? So again, to your exact point about the editing, just because someone is charging 500 does not make them a lesser designer than the person charging 5,000, but you really need to see the portfolio of the work to see, does their style actually represent what you're looking for in your style? Because you could have the best designer in the world, and if they're not used to doing covers like yours or topics like yours, you're better off going elsewhere.
Yeah. So if you're doing the self-publishing thing and you're finding all your own people, right? Look through their portfolio. Also look through cover designs that you enjoy and send the designer that you choose to work with links to the books whose covers you like, and explain why you like those covers. Is it color? Is it Is it design? Is it photography? Is it font choice? Is it the blending of the various design pieces, in a cohesive unit, whatever. If you've chosen a publisher, like an indie or hybrid publisher who has cover designers, I would suggest that you look through that publisher's catalog and point out the books that they've already published and point to them. Okay, these are like 5 covers you've done in the past that I absolutely love. Like, who are those designers? Like, that's who I want to narrow it down to. But expect a good cost for a good cover, and good covers are important. This might be one of the most significant pieces, I think, of your final, what I'm going to call packaging of your book, because people do judge a book by its cover, and anybody who's telling you anything other than that is selling you BS.
It's so true, because if your cover sucks, they're not even going to pick it up to see how good the writing is. So you could invest that 13 grand of editing into it, but if you decided to go this I'm going to do it in Canva by myself path,
no,
it's not gonna work. And you know what's funny is that I'm actively in the process of judging books for an award contest. I do this every year for this particular organization. Usually I get a ton of them. This year I got a real small category, so I only have 20. And one of the books, I kid you not, has no title on it, has no subtitle, and no author name, and the spine is upside down. And I'm like, it does not matter what the inside of your book says. No one's going to read it, because there's literally not even a title. I've been doing this for 6 years. I've never seen a book without a title. I'll send you a picture later. I
can't wait to see. So I'm assuming you opened it. Tell me that it's at least purposefully done that way.
No.
Oh.
No, it's hard. It almost looks like the file may have had a title and subtitle at the top, because the design starts like 2/3 of the way down. I have no idea what's happening, but obviously it's not getting ranked high. But it's just like, again, like that happens when we are the experts as authors in our topic. We're the subject matter expert in our own story and whatever it is that we do and how we show up in the world. Everything else you need to outsource to professionals. You and I have been doing this for a long time, and I still would never dare to design my own cover or to edit my own work or to typeset my own, like none of it. Even though I technically probably could, it doesn't mean I should be.
Yeah. So this is where knowing these numbers is really important, folks. When you know all the numbers in advance, then you can start putting the money aside that you need to do it right and do it well. Because when you end up looking at covers such as this one that Jen just described, you give other books who might have been self-published a really bad name.
Exactly.
Right? Because you didn't cross your T's and dot your I's, and you didn't do it professionally. At the end of the day, regardless of who you hire, however, you are the main spokesperson and representative and advocate for your book. It's up to you to know as much as you possibly can. That's not to say that mistakes won't happen. They will, especially first time through. I certainly made them as a first time author. And I knew the industry, and I had an MFA. Still made mistakes, because you just don't know things until you do them the first time, right? But you do need to at least do your due diligence to understand as much as you possibly can to try to minimize the amount of mistakes you make on book number 1. So cover design. Cover design is super, super important. It is the thing that everybody will look at first before even engaging in the material inside. So that needs to be done super well. So invest in a really great cover. Really great covers, okay? Apart from the main basics on the front, which should be your title. I guess we have to say these things now. Title, subtitle, author at minimum, okay? But your back cover, while it's not the thing that people usually look at first, is the thing that people flip to once they're hooked by the front cover. And the back cover is another area of selling points. Your back cover should have endorsements, a description, maybe a small author bio, maybe an author picture, okay? There are some variables here, but you want the back cover to have content that is going to sell your book to the reader who's looking at it, okay? Now, endorsements. Endorsements are outside readers, hopefully, that have solid credentials, bylines, prior publications, some clout or reputability that helps boost your book's credibility, because they've basically said, I sign off on this as a great book, okay? A lot of people don't need to know or be familiar with the names on the back cover endorsements. What they're looking at is, oh, this was also an author, or this is also a person in a particular field that's related to what this book is about, or they have a credential, right? You don't need to really know the person specifically to understand somebody else external to the author has given their seal, thank you, seal of approval on this book. So you're asking them for an endorsement or testimonial, whatever word you want to use, or review. And that goes on the back cover. Now, what's often difficult is that when these get sent into authors is they're like 3 paragraphs long. All right. That takes up the entire backside of the book. So you can use the full paragraphs if you want, or the full endorsement in the front matter of your book under advanced praise. But what you want for the back is the most poignant representative snippet from their endorsement that sells your book the most. Okay.
It's like one sentence.
One. That's like less than 100 characters.
It's not a lot of space. And it's possible. And most of the time when someone is providing an endorsement, a testimonial, a review, whatever we want to call it, the writer of that is fully fine with you trimming it down to fit into different places in relation to books, because that is just what happens in this industry. It's not uncommon that you do get something that's really, really long and amazing and it needs to be trimmed back. So to have that, like, I'm just trying to illustrate not to have anxiety around like, oh, now I have to go back to them to ask them if I can make it shorter. 99% of the time, no one is going to care, because it's just a very common practice.
Yeah. And a lot of people are going to be like, do whatever you want with it.
That's what I
edit it, cut it up, whatever. Like, as long as it holds the integrity of what was originally stated, like most people are just happy to have helped you, right? Who have even been asked. And then of course your back cover blurb, right, is like a paragraph. Okay. That's the description of what your book holds for content, promise, story, whatever it is. And then your bio is probably even shorter. It's going to comprise 1 to 2 sentences max if you can fit it in there. Right. So you don't have a lot of word real estate on the back, but that word real estate counts for a lot. Okay. Because it's basically marketing for your book to try to push it towards the, line of purchase in the store or online in your cart. Now, what about, Jen? I get this question a lot. Advanced praise. What's a good number of advanced praise to have in the front matter of your book? If you're going to do that, what looks like full and complete and doesn't look like somebody went and got 2 people off the street to write some stuff?
My recommendation is usually somewhere around 8, 10, 12, somewhere in there. So it kind of fills 2 or 3, even 4 pages in the front of the book. Because again, going back to that, everything being printed on, in 4-page spreads, having something that's 1 page front and back, a 2nd page front and back, and sometimes a 3rd just has a nice look to it versus something, and we have authors that only have 2, and we have authors that have more than 12. But I think that couple of pages of endorsements, because my experience is that most of the time people are not actually reading the advanced praise, but they are skimming at the titles and the names of the people who wrote it, just for that added validation. So something might have caught their eye on the back cover of the book, or someone might have said something and they're just skimming through to be like, oh, do I know anybody in this space? Or is there another author that I recognize, or whatever the case may be? So I think giving them just a couple of pages to skim through is a sufficient amount.
Yeah. What about a forward? So a forward, folks. Okay. First of all, forward is with an O. I just have to say that I've seen so many times recently where like somebody's sending me a forward to look at and it's spelled with an A, and it always cracks me up. Forward, word with an O. And so a forward is at the beginning of the book. It's not required. You don't have to have one for your nonfiction. But they can, again, it's another boost of credibility. It's somebody else within the space that you're writing about who's essentially setting up of the book, right? And setting you up as the source, right? The authority on what's about to occur. So helpful, yeah, can be. Required, no. But if you're thinking about a forward in that front matter, Jen, how long should a forward be? Less than 1,000 words?
Yeah, I would say no more than 1,500.
Okay.
And just know, like, in my experience, what we're asking for people to provide back and what they provide back are not always the same. So if I go back in time to one of my past books, I had asked the then Lieutenant Governor at the time to write the foreword to my book, in which she was like, yes, of course. And I liaised with her communications team, and I was like, all right, I'm really aiming for like 750 words, which is, a couple of pages. And I don't remember exactly what I got back, but it was significantly less than that. And it ended up being like one whole page and then like a little bit of a next page. And I'm like, you know what? It doesn't matter, because she said what she wanted to say in a really condensed, consolidated way. And I think sometimes people think if someone's writing a forward that it has to be this really long and lengthy, multiple, 10, 15 pages. And there are absolutely forwards that do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if we're thinking about a quantifying number here for the sake of the process, saying 1,500 or less is helpful, because then it gives your person that you're asking, again, those guardrails to be like, all right, it can't be more than 1,500. And then they might come back and say, is it okay if I only write 500? And I feel like your answer should be yes, but I'm not here to dictate what someone does. But generally speaking, so somewhere not more than 1,500, because that puts it at like 6 pages at most. It has to just be meaningful, because that's really the point. We don't want to just be like yammering on for no reason. We want those 1,500 words or less to be really impactful.
Yeah. And I think so. Other things to consider here, right? So we've already talked about the fact that if you're writing a short book, it translates to page count. Think about, like, do you want a 15-page forward for your, 100-page book? Like, is that proportion or ratio, right? In sync? Does now the forward seem to kind of like outshine you when you're supposed to be the authority on the book? Less is more, I think. And the forward is really there, I believe, to support you and what you're saying, not to detract from, right, what's going on once you get beyond the forward. I also think some people skip forwards as well. I find that a lot of readers skip a lot of front matter and back matter stuff in favor of just like the meaty middle. And in your case, Jen, like Lieutenant Governor alone, like just the title, right, would be like, oh shit, this is like a legit, legit book kind of thing. So
I think what's interesting with the forwards is that I think a lot of times we assume that it has to be somebody with like street cred. And when you have someone with street cred, it 100% is a benefit. Absolutely. There's no two ways around that. However, we have an author who had her daughter write the forward to her book because it made sense. So it's really more about it making sense, because if someone's going to provide a perspective that's going to further really help the reader understand what the rest of the book is going to be about, you're in good shape. Getting somebody with a no name always is a benefit, but it's not a requirement.
Yeah. Okay, beautiful. So before we go into things that are a little more elusive, like time and like things like that, Jen, what should people expect from like publishing costs perspective? So let's tackle this more from not somebody who's going and doing these things piecemeal, because I feel like we already kind of addressed that by talking about cover design and editing interior, but like somebody's going to a publisher such as yourself who has everything packaged together. What do you believe is the range that people should be expecting on publishing?
Yeah, it's such a hard question to answer. And I do have the book cost blueprint on the publisherpurpose.com website that anyone can download and go into these numbers in more detail. But to all of the points that we were making before, it depends on how long the manuscript is. That is the number one deciding factor. And the second factor, actually the first factor, is what type of editing does it need? So if it is something that needs a developmental edit, is going to be higher than something that does not. And then secondarily, it's going to be the word count. But in our case, if someone is budgeting anywhere between 18,000 because it doesn't need a dev edit, it's on maybe a shorter side from a word count length, up to 25,000 if it needs a dev edit, or maybe it's a little bit longer. That is the way that we operate, though. And so the caveat here is not all hybrid publishers are created equal. So you have some hybrid publishers, and we're kind of like in the middle spot, because the number of publishers that are at, because like our highest is usually about 25,000. We have a number of people that we're often compared to that are at 35 or 40,000. Or there's even a couple that are 50, 70, 100,000 for a hybrid publisher. And then on the other range, if we're thinking of like, okay, you're out to self-publish it, I really believe in order to self-publish a book properly, you need to be investing at a minimum about 10,000. And again, it depends on how much editing is required and how long it is. So I think sometimes people have this interpretation that self-publishing is going to save them a ton of money, but it really doesn't, because when you're self-publishing, you're kind of missing the strategy because you don't have somebody to guide you on what those best practices are. And you have to be your own project manager, which can be such an expense that is something that's not even calculable sometimes.
Yeah. So true story. Dear Universe, I Get It Now. That's my first book. That's a memoir. I used a very small independent press that's actually underneath a Vermont-owned independent bookstore. And so I paid them a very small fee to do the unfun parts of publishing, like getting me set up on Ingram and barcodes and Bowker ISBN registration and all that stuff. But I had to do everything else. So in a lot of ways, it was pretty much like self-publishing, because I went out and I got my own editors, my own cover designer. I had to go and find my endorsers. I had to review all the proofs that came back. I mean, you have to do that anyway, but like I went and got my own proofreader. I mean, all the things. And it was a lot of time and energy to project manage all of those parts and pieces for my very first time as an author. And when I tallied up all of the costs at the end of the day, it still cost me 10 grand, if not more, because I was paying every single person. Now, what I can say is at that point in my life, the benefit of having done it that way was that I didn't owe a huge chunk all at once. Okay. I didn't have like a 20% down payment with the publisher, right away. I had little chunks of it over time. And by the grace of God, as each of those payments came in, I was able to take care of them. But all in all, it was still $10,000. Now my second book, Do Not Write a Book Until You Read This One, that was co-authored. So we were sharing the cost. We split the cost between the two of us, but my co-author runs a hybrid press. And when we were done with the manuscript, her team took it over. I probably spent just about the same amount of money, my half. Okay. And the reason that it was still cost that much, and that was at half, is because this book is a beast. But, I still put in probably the same amount of money or like within that range, but way less stress because her team of people took it. And like, all I had to do was like, check things off as agreeing. So it's all about what you think are the costs and benefits, of which avenue you take. But I agree, Jen. I think at minimum, people should be expecting 10,000.
Yeah, at the minimum. Yeah. And I think from a quick math standpoint, because this is all about the numbers, is if you think about how much money you make, whether it is that you're in a full-time position, whether you're, you own your own business and whatever it is that you're paying yourself as a salary, if you can try to identify what your hourly rate is. So say my hourly rate is $40 an hour. And my project managers, we have been in business for 10 years. And they know what they're doing. And we budget 100 hours per project. That is by people who know what they're doing. So if we know what we're doing and it's 100 hours of a budget and you're making $40 an hour, that's another $4,000 in your time that you are losing. And then you're also using it in ways that are not as effective. And if it takes us 100 hours, it's going to take you who knows no idea what you're doing more than 100 hours. Yeah. And $40 an hour might be a really low estimate of what somebody's making. So it's one of those things to kind of like just an added bucket, an added number to throw into the mix to say, all right, really, what does this look like? Because we're talking about the cover, and the editing and all those things, but really project management can really weigh down things. But at the same time, to your point, it might make sense to not have to come up with that expense and you want to piecemeal it. And that's a perfectly great strategy too for the right person.
Yeah. I think it all depends, right? It's all going to depend. What is your budget? What is your lifestyle at the time? How experienced are you? Do you know? I mean, I knew enough to get around. Mm-hmm. I knew enough to get it out there. Would I do things differently? Absolutely. But that's because you live and you learn, right? I don't because I already had a master's degree in writing. I already understood ins and outs of publishing from that master's and from the organization I was affiliated with at the time. I had knowledge that a lot of other people don't have. So it would be hard for me to recommend that route to anybody. You'd have to be a real go-getter and you'd have to be somebody who is really interested in learning those pieces, doing it well, taking your time. But to Jen's point, it's going to take you a lot longer in the beginning because you don't know what you don't know yet. Now this leads also to something that's on our list, like platform size, and we'll probably wrap it up here. If you're spending all of the time doing all those itty bitty little pieces of publishing for yourself, you're taking away from energy and time put into developing marketing and a platform and outreach for the book when the book comes out. Now, technically, you should kind of be doing that while you're writing the book, which I know is hard to hear. But some of the beauty of being able to pass the manuscript off to the publisher, who's going to then do its thing for the next 6 months, is that you can then recast your time and energy and focus over to getting people ready and psyched about the book coming out in another 6 months. Really hard to balance both when you're project managing the movement of the manuscript through the production process, right? And then also trying to build a platform that is strong and that brings people to the book when the book is ready. Jen, anything else you want to say about platform or platform size, since it's a numbers thing?
I think that was well said, and I think the number size only really matters depending on if you are going to go a traditional publishing route. The actual vanity number they care about. Whereas if you're going hybrid or independent, there are strategies in every direction to work with you, regardless of what your platform size is.
Yep, 100%. So that's actually a really great segue as to where we're going next month. So for next month, we're coming back March 27th. And we're going to be talking really about credibility and publishing options and choosing the right publisher, right? And so this is where, we're intending to break down these avenues that you have in front of you, traditional or etc. Obviously today we focused a lot on like self, indie, and hybrid, because those are the spaces, and the people that we're really conversing with the most, as us as professionals in the industry. But we will certainly touch on traditional next time. So we encourage you to join us then for that conversation. I also want to let people know that from a numbers perspective, we spent a lot of time last month in January's Unscripted talking about ROI data for your book based on business book research that was done last year. So that's a really fabulous episode to go back and watch for more understanding of numbers and figures as a part of this game of writing and publishing. We included in the description of today's video some resources. Jen and I's book both touch on a variety of different numbers. And when I say Jen and mine, I don't mean that we co-authored. I mean, she has one and I have one, and they have lots of really great similar information. So you can't go wrong with either. So those links are in there. Jen, you mentioned your cost blueprint. Is that also listed in our description?
I don't know, but I will add it if it's not. But yeah, okay. Publisherpurpose.com, it's right there in the right-hand side. And okay. It breaks down all of the numbers, so that way you don't have to be flying completely in the unknown.
Perfect. So people go and check that out. You don't want to miss out on that. I know that in Do Not Write a Book Until You Read This One, there's an appendices that's all about the costs associated with publishing. So that's also a really great resource for everybody to have. So go grab one of our books, ebook or hardcover. They're really beautiful references to have about all the things, but definitely have the number piece in that conversation. Jen, as always, fabulous hanging out with you.
So nice. It's like a nice little, and I love that we're doing the morning now, because we were afternoon and now we're
like in that 3 o'clock slump, like, oh, having to pull ourselves out.
Now we're like, all right, we got some coffee, got some caffeine, we're like ready to roll. So I'm hoping that our planning this year, while yes, still unscripted, I'm hoping that our advanced planning is already coming in handy, because we're already kind of talking about like what next month is, what last month was. And so we have a whole year ahead. And so I'm continue to be excited. And when we talk next time, it should be a lot warmer in both Vermont and Connecticut. So a little excited about that.
I know, I'm so ready for spring. Yeah. All right, my friends, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for catching the replay. If you have follow-up questions, please post them in the comments. We'll be watching. And on that note, we'll see you next time.
Bye.